Hello everyone. Caz McGovern is an award-winning filmmaker and writer. She's based in London, England. In 2017, she launched a freelance video editing business called CM Video Arts and has since then managed post-production in communication, fashion and publishing for clients such as Google, New York Magazine, Bipolar Publishing and the United Nations. In addition to her editing work, she has served as a screenwriter, videographer and a website designer for independent artists and businesses, both in London and New York. Her movie, They Don't Leave, has been screened at 15 festivals and won the Best Suspense Short Award at 4 of them. She also received the Big Sky Film Grant. Her neo-noir script, The Stray, is ranked in the top 3% of all feature scripts on Coverfly and is featured on the Blacklist, having also been awarded the Dennis Diderot, if I've pronounced that right, Artist Residency Grant. But Caz also has a diagnosis of bipolar type 2, which, as you can hear from our conversation, she doesn't let define her or hold her back. This is our conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello, Caz.
Hi, Darren. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. It's nice. It's nice to chat with you.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing I should mention is you have a diagnosis of bipolar type 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just did such a great job covering my professional and creative career, but for the other side of what we're going to talk about today, I was diagnosed with type 2 bipolar in 2009,
Mhm.
and I was diagnosed in the US with PTSD in 2011. And I've been on medication and sort of in therapy on and off since then. And I've also been really lucky that, especially for the last 7 years, I've been, for the most part, pretty stable. I might go off the deep end for at the worst, like a few weeks, um, but historically, I was hospitalized twice, once in 2009 and once in 2011. So, yeah, I have
Okay.
experience with that as well.
Just for those who aren't familiar with bipolar, I know there's a lot of myths out there. People think about mood swings, they think they're instant, they're back and forward. That's not
Mm.
really what we're talking about. Um, what is bipolar disorder for those who aren't aware of it?
It's a mood disorder, I would
Mhm.
say, that is characterized by intense lows and intense highs. I'm type 2, which is slightly different to type 1. I'm very lucky that I don't have to deal with mania as intensely as type 1 has to. And what will affect me more are intense bouts of depression and then something called hypomania, which is a
Mhm.
sort of tampered down version of mania. It's a little bit less intense. Yeah, that's my understanding, but I don't know if I just got a bunch wrong. You're the therapist, so.
No, no, it's okay. Well, I'm no expert on it. I just go by what the literature says. There are differences in type 1 and type 2. I think you've outlined them quite well. I think with type 1, if memory serves, I think there's a risk of psychosis as well, but not so much
Yeah.
with type 2.
Yeah, that's true. And
Uh,
I don't know if I've had a full-blown psychotic episode before, but I've definitely, especially what in the times that I was hospitalized, I did hear like things that weren't like there. I don't know if that qualifies as part of psychosis, but I definitely had some experience with that. And yeah, the sort of intensity of mania, bipolar runs in my family, and I've seen people with type 1, and it's a very um, intense experience, even knowing people that have it, let alone having to go through it.
mhm. And if memory serves, I think it can affect sleep patterns, things like that.
Big time, yeah, yeah. Um, and I sort of come from a long line of insomniacs, and one of the things that my medication does is conk me out. I'm actually on a tranquilizer. I'm not on an antidepressant, and even with that, I'm still not an amazing sleeper. And I think in general, with I think both types of bipolar, and with other mental health as well, I think depression in general, sleeping patterns are really dysregulated, and I guess we'll go on to talk a bit later about like the importance of consistency. And I think it's sometimes really hard to meet consistency if your sleep is all over the place.
Yeah, it will affect your energy levels as much as anything else, as your
Yeah.
moods and so on. Regarding regarding your diagnosis, what age would you have been whenever you first maybe felt something wasn't quite right? There was something maybe going on.
Yeah, it's funny. I think in hindsight, I actually started um, something seemed a bit off by already 12 and 13. I think at that age, that's such a tumultuous age anyway for anyone. Your body and your brain are sort of recalibrating, and you're experiencing these new intense hormones. And especially being a young girl in the early thousands, it was a very sort of toxic time to be a teenage girl.
Mm.
And so, and it may very well still be as difficult as it was then. I don't know. So, I mean, that's the context for, yeah, a difficult time. But I think that I was already starting to, there was just something off. Like I was already starting to experience what I now understand as depression. I didn't
Mm.
understand then. And a sort of intensity of mood swings, which again makes more sense in hindsight. But yeah, I didn't really understand what was happening to me at the time, but it definitely, and I didn't meet my husband. I met my husband quite soon after. I met my husband when I was 14. And I think even by that point, I had already started sort of pathologizing and compulsively acting out in male relationships in this way that again I maybe is typical of that age, but I think in hindsight definitely aligns with some sort of undiagnosed mental health issue.
Mm. Whenever you received your diagnosis, I'd just be curious what that meant to you, to get the diagnosis.
I was 17, and I think for me, I found it really helpful. I think it contextualized what I was feeling.
Hmm.
I was diagnosed in the throes of a very intense nervous breakdown. I was sort of sent home from school and was sort of just like in my house, like walking around the house for 2 months. And I feel like it validated what was happening in my head. And I think as well, like you can probably tell from my accent, like I come from an American background, and I think, American culture is a lot more maybe like too comfortable being, medicated, and like therapy and mental health have quite a robust discourse in the US, and that's not true here. And so I think it came more naturally to me. There wasn't any resistance with getting my diagnosis. I felt, like I said, yeah, I felt more validated than anything else. And it made me feel actually more comfortable within my mental health journey.
Mm.
And I think it instilled a value that I'm a big proponent of to this day, that like mental health is often, especially in the UK, not treated like a physical ailment. The sort of stiff upper lip thing, all those adages are still true. And mental health should be treated like you would treat like a bad back. If you have a bad back, you go on medication, you go to therapy, you deal with it. And I think the same thing should be true with mental health, that we treat it in the same way.
Well, I would agree. Going maybe just a little bit further, our physical health and our mental health are often linked.
Totally,
We need to pay
totally.
attention to both.
Yeah, yeah. And like I think because I don't know, our internal world and our psychology is how we experience life, and I feel like you run the risk of wasting really valuable time by not by dealing with it, and
Mm.
sort of owning it, if that makes sense. And it's very frustrating to see how it's still so stigmatized here. It's getting a bit better, but it's
Mm.
still, I don't know, it's still, I know a lot of people that have really struggled to, finally get on medication or finally get into therapy. And I do think it's a cultural sort of pressure not to deal with that stuff.
Mm. But there is also a very creative side to you.
Yeah.
You've gone into movie making, the media, things like that. And I'm just wondering, is as much as we might have a predisposition to be very, very creative, I'm just wondering about how your creativity has maybe helped you, if you know what I mean, help you express things that sometimes we find it difficult to express.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it has. I think even when I was very young, when I was my family background is a sort of mixed one. I come from certainly a privileged background, but it was a mixed childhood. And I think from a very young age, storytelling felt like an escape to me. It felt like something that, I don't know, would help me work through whatever I was feeling in this weird way of, you take what's inside and you make it
Mhm.
external. And there's something about that I think most artists I know, I think, create work to have help other people feel seen, but I think that we also want to
Mm.
feel seen through our own work, if that makes sense. And I think storytelling is a great way to do that, you know.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of some of the most amazing love songs that you ever listen to have been written by
Yeah,
someone whose heart has been broken. You know,
yeah,
there's something. There's something quite cathartic in that. There's something in the artist being able to express that. But other people, as they're listening to it, or maybe they're watching the movie, reading the book, whatever it happens to be,
definitely.
there's something that really connects with them.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that shows a commonality in all of us.
Yeah, there's a C.S. Lewis quote that I love. I think it's we read to know we're not alone. And I think that there's something so human about consuming stories and also creating them. There's something very, yeah, not primitive, but yeah, human about our need to create and consume creativity.
Mm. So, particularly with the filmmaking, I know I'd like to talk about your movie, but what was it about the filmmaking particularly that interested you?
Um, the short
But
answer, I guess it's my favorite way of telling stories.
I was just going to say that I can't imagine. I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, there's cameras everywhere, there's script writers, there's everything's going on. There's actors. I can't really think of anything that would be less stressful.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And I will say that filmmaking, a lot of the process of filmmaking, I sort of put up with to do my favorite parts, which is writing and working with actors. I'm not one of those. A lot of people really love the toys and stuff, and I wish I was one of those people, but I'm not. And so, I mean, I agree. It's a difficult form of art, but it's when it works, there's this like incredible, satisfying fulfillment in it that I just because it's so difficult and because it's also I love people and it's a very people oriented like way of creating art
Mm,
that like that when it's good it's great and the highs are like worth the lows I would say overall.
mm.
Yeah.
And I think the difference, whether it's a movie or a play or something like that, you know, human beings. We talked a moment ago about how we connect through the things. We tend to learn through stories. Even you
Yeah,
think of the
that's so
fairy
true.
stories when you're a kid, we tend to learn. We recognize characters. There's things we identify in various characters, which leads me
True.
on to your movie, They Don't Leave. Now, again, I don't want to give away too much of it. I would encourage anyone, if you haven't watched it yet, do please watch it. I'm going to put a link in the description of this video and the podcast, so do watch it. Um, but you have your main character, Carly, and she's on, if you will, how would I express it? She's on a bit of a journey, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
As most characters are, but she's on a different kind of journey. She's on a journey. She's recently been divorced, so we kind of begin where she's maybe trying to get to know herself a bit better, and it's what she finds as the story goes on.
Yeah, so as you elegantly put, she's at a sort of crossroads in her life
Hmm.
and is trying to quit drinking and sort of heal from her divorce. And she seeks refuge in this cabin that's been in her family for generations, but that she doesn't remember being at ever. And while there, a series of events happen that unravel a sort of sinister familial history that relates to her in more ways than one. And she's sort of forced to confront herself in all that.
Mm,
And I think the film deals with, I think the overarching theme is what it means to take responsibility for yourself, in
mhm.
particular, if you're a 20 something woman who has been through, specific types of traumas, especially. Yeah.
Because also it also looks at generational trauma as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So we're
I
not
think
just talking about the individual person's journey.
definitely.
We're looking at the where do I come from sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I don't know, all of us have sort of a familial history of sorts. And I
Mm,
think breaking cycles is something, especially my generation, is really wrestling with
mm,
um, and has become. There's more of a discussion around that now than I think there was even 20 years ago about what
mm,
it means to we sort of it's a nature versus nurture thing, I suppose, that we inherit our family's stories, if that makes sense. And we
yeah.
inherit, whether it's trauma or addiction, we often find ourselves in the same story that is dictated, our families for generations. And I do think there's something really powerful about breaking detrimental cycles. Yeah.
I think we sometimes forget that our parents had parents.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And you don't realize until you're an adult that none of us know what we're doing. I think we're all just like trying to make the best decisions that we can. Um, and yeah, as you say, like our parents are really just people.
Mm.
And they definitely had parents as well. Yeah.
Every bit as flawed as we are, as maybe the next
Yeah.
generation will be. But there is, yeah, I would agree. There is something in looking at that those cycles. If,
Hmm.
but looking at those cycles that keep repeating themselves. It's looking at you mentioned the nature versus nurture. Um, I believe it's a bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with you.
There can be something genetic going on, but there is also the environment.
Mhm.
So you could have someone with I don't know, the nature to be, for instance, aggressive or something like that. But raised in an environment where there is a lot of aggression, that's going to become heightened. But if
Yeah.
they're raised in an environment where they learn to manage that aggression can be used constructively. They're not going to be losing their tempers or whatever, but they might become very conscientious. They might become, very dedicated to something. So there is a bit of both going on, I believe.
Totally. And they kind of play off one another in a way.
Hmm.
Yeah. But I agree, it's both. Um, and they influence each other in different ways. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I'm just curious. Looking at your background, your history, the things we've talked about, and talking about the movie. Um, what influences do you feel would have went into your movie? Your own personally, you don't have to give too much detail, but our own histories, our own lives that influenced your work, that influenced that movie.
Mm. I think in terms of personal experiences, I was my 20s, especially my early to mid 20s, more so than my late, were very chaotic. I had a lot of difficulty adjusting to a healthy adult life. And I think that I reached a point where I had to make a decision about who I wanted to be, what I wanted my life to be about. And I was going to have to change, or I would have, not to be dramatic, but I would have died. I would have ended up in an alleyway somewhere. I would have ended up hospitalized. Like the way I was living was just not sustainable. And I think that I sort of began to reckon with this idea of taking responsibility for oneself and this idea of like, whatever was done to you as a child is of course not your fault, but it
Mhm.
is up to you to like fix your life and take responsibility for yourself, whatever that might look like. And so there were some creative, inspirations for making the film as well. But like in terms of personal experiences, I think that was definitely something I wanted to discuss and something I wanted to write about, and maybe in a weird way, like close a door, because my life is so different now. And I'm not, again, like it's completely fiction, the story, but the sort of nucleus of who the protagonist is feels familiar to me. Um, and yeah, making it and then having it be finished now, it really feels like a full circle. Yeah, just a closing of a chapter in a really fantastic way.
I can imagine completing the movie that you've poured your heart and soul into, if you will. Seeing that completed, seeing it being screened and so on, and so well received. Yeah, I can't think of any better form of closure, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And
It's just
like,
something really gratifying there, really
yeah, yeah,
satisfying.
it definitely was. And I'm glad that it's finished and that everyone that worked on it is, moved on to fantastic new creative adventures and stuff. But making it was a really ironic because the film is so dark, but it was such a blast to make. It was so much fun. And like I just learned a lot about the industry, about filmmaking, and about I think just people in general. In this way that yeah, just feels really wonderful. I feel really grateful for the entire experience.
I'm just wondering, I know I mentioned earlier on, I can't think of anything that would be more stressful because there's so much going on at once. Um, challenges did you face, and what challenges would you face? When you're working in those fields.
I think filmmaking is really like a fancy word for problem solving, and um, so there's always something. I think a problem that I've been lucky to not have yet is, people with power trips sort of making sets sort of an unhealthy environment, which I haven't experienced yet. I know that that's talked about a lot though, within the industry as a problem. Um,
People's egos.
yeah, yeah. And there are a lot of like power sort of systems in place in filmmaking. There's a sort of weird hierarchy with, especially if the talent is of note and they're going to be responsible for the you making a profit, like they kind of run the set, and then also the producer and the director really are the head of the ship, and so the way they behave sets the tone for the set. I think for They Don't Leave, we actually had a very drama-free experience. We shot the film in 8 days. We actually finished early because we were ahead of schedule. And we had some weather issues, and I think that that's it in terms of the actual shooting of the film. I don't remember like any huge problems once we were shooting. I did write the film. We were set to shoot in 2020, and then, COVID happened.
Yeah, yeah.
So we were delayed for 2 years. So that presented its problems. And the shelf life, or not the shelf life, but the life of this film has been 4 years instead of 2, which I think 2 is more typical for a short. And so that's been a challenge. But for the most part, I don't know. I can't speak for everyone else, but I just had the best time making this film, like especially on set. Like the post-production, I remember being a bit more dramatic. Um, and I got sort of into my head about its like significance in my career. I really thought it was going to like either make or break my career if it failed, and even if it didn't end up failing, and even if it had, a short is never going to dictate your career ever. And so I don't know. I'm glad I was wrong on that, because that was not fun as a challenge. But
Right.
yeah,
I can imagine as well. I mean, getting the go ahead to make a movie and then COVID hits.
yeah,
And we didn't know it was going to last 2 years. A lot of people
we did
think it's going
not.
to be a month or two. So
Did you
I,
guys remember? Yeah, 3 months. I remember that. Yeah.
I'm just imagining, something of that scale, but then to be delayed by something, and again, it's another month, it's another 2 months, it's another 3 months. Um, I can only imagine the amount of uncertainty that would have brought up, and the fear that this thing's never going to get made, maybe.
For sure, for sure. And I think, it's funny, it came at a weird time. I had lost my mom in 2019, and toward the end of 2019, I had sort of gone into like work burnout mode. And so I was working a 9 to 5 at the time. I wasn't freelancing. I was learning to drive, and I was getting ready for the film. And there was something about getting shut down that was, initially, it ended up being for the best, but initially it was just crushing, because all this stuff I was sort of avoiding dealing with just came like crashing down, and the world was falling apart at the same time. So
Mm.
it was at least the beginning of COVID was very intense that way. It changed rapidly. I was lucky enough to have a really good experience the first lockdown. But yeah, that was an emotional roller coaster for sure when it
Yeah.
first came about.
And this is the thing, you just mentioned losing your mother, and this is the thing about a bereavement. I think that one of the first thing that hits us when we lose someone is shock.
Yeah,
And I think one of the things we do when we're in that state of shock following a bereavement is we tend to get very busy,
yeah, yeah.
because we'll have to sort this out, we'll have to sort that out, we'll have to do the other thing. All of this on top of our day-to-day stuff,
Mhm.
so we do tend to get very busy. I think it's only after a while, when things start to settle, I think it's only then we actually start to grieve.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. And I don't know, there are so many different facets to grief as well. And I
Mm.
think that me and my brothers always joke that we have a different like grief remote setting. Like each of us has a thing for one of the 6 stages, and mine was definitely sadness, but not really dealing with the other stages that are just as important, really. And I think that a lot of 2019, I was, yeah, like not grieving in the most efficient way, if there's a thing, if there's a thing to that, I don't
Well, I
know.
was about to ask what's the most efficient way to grieve.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
know. I don't know.
this
There's no such thing. There's nothing messier in the world than grief.
you mentioned the stages. I think, and you're welcome to disagree. These are just my thoughts. To call them the stages, I don't know if that's the right term because I personally don't believe there's any particular order.
Well, definitely, yeah, I do agree with
I think, we can
you.
feel
Linear.
anger, guilt, we can
Yeah.
feel anxiety, depression. We go through a lot of different things, and sometimes we even go through it all in just in one conversation in our own head.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And
Um,
it doesn't ever go away. That's the thing. It never stops, really.
yeah, and the other thing is other people can be grieving as well, but we're not all at the same place. We're all grieving, but we're at, call it, a different stage, maybe. You know, we're not all at the same place.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the thing, and I'm always careful when I use this word because sooner or later we do get to a place, we just call it acceptance.
Hmm.
And I think we struggle with that for a lot of different reasons because acceptance isn't what we think it is. Acceptance doesn't mean we're okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It means we're just acknowledging it is what it is, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think that there's a really, I forget who said it. There's a great allegory about how like grief starts off as this like huge boulder, and as
Mhm,
time goes on, it becomes a brick, and like it's still heavy, but you can carry a brick. Can't carry a
mm,
boulder, but you can carry a brick. And I think that's when acceptance sort of, yeah, comes about, is when you can live with it a bit easier, even though it never goes away. That still blows my mind that, you'll get like a grief bomb,
mm.
like at any point, um, you know, years later,
Yeah, so we don't necessarily have to be another word a lot of people use. We don't have to be triggered in some way.
yeah.
Sometimes it just comes over as like a wave.
Yeah, yeah, exactly like a wave. Which again, you get better at handling that, especially I don't know why the wave imagery and the feeling is so like that mirrors each other so well. But
Mm,
like if you visualize it during like one of those waves, like I find that so helpful because it'll just let it happen, let it take you out and you'll come back in.
mm. I once heard someone say, I'm going to paraphrase, I can't remember word for word, but it's along that you have to ride that wave till it dissipates.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, and I'm thinking in terms of, having to wait for the movie, there's been COVID, there was the loss of your mother, you're dealing with bipolar um, as well. What have you found useful? What have you found helpful? What practices or routines have you found helpful? And I'm asking because other people who might have a bipolar diagnosis might find some of your ideas helpful. I'm just wondering what have you found helpful?
I think it's something that was really important for me, which I think I've learned the lesson now, is that there's a difference between effective coping strategies and then sort of things that give us instant gratification and make us feel better in the moment. So even though this will sound painfully obvious to some people, like other people, it took me a while to learn the lesson that like binge drinking, doing drugs, chain smoking, staying out till 6 in the morning, like those are not helpful strategies. Like even
Mm,
though in the moment they really feel like they're helping, they're not. And so learning the difference between that and effective strategies, which I always hate saying this because it sounds so like goody two shoes, and I don't mean it to sound like I meet them every day, but not drinking, tracking how much water you drink, exercise, meditation, eating right, like going to therapy. I found inner child work and inner critic work really helpful, but
mm,
that it's not a one size fits all thing, but I
yeah,
think therapy is important. Taking your meds, like all those things that no one like I think for a lot of us that stuff does not come naturally. I really had to like teach myself
yeah,
to how to do that stuff. And I don't always get there. Some days like when you're so depressed that you can't lift your arm above your head to like brush your hair or like making a cup of tea and getting out of your PJs feels like Mount fucking Everest, like ooh, sorry. Sorry. It feels like Mount Everest. Like you're it's not going to happen. None of that stuff's going to happen. There are going to be some days where you just need to survive. And if that's, as long as that's not every day, I think that's fine too, as part of, your coping mechanism is to just make it through the day. I think that that's all right on some days.
No, it's really what you're describing there is self-care.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's looking at things in our own best interest. Now, what I would say sometimes, because sometimes we find it hard to have the motivation, again, maybe we have disrupted sleep, things like that. It feels like there's a dozen things happening at once we have to cope with. So, there could be a loss of energy. There could be a lot of different things. So we could find it hard to feel motivated. I think one of the things that motivates us, probably the biggest thing that motivates us, is incentive.
Hmm.
Sometimes we find it hard to have any kind of incentive, even.
That's a really good point.
If I like to look at things the opposite way around. If we don't have the motivation to do the things that are in our own best interest, such as our diet, drinking water, things like that, seeing a therapist, and so on, I think we need to pay attention to what happens if we don't.
Yes. Yes. And I think that that's my main, now that those are tools of mine, because it
Mm.
takes a while for them to be things that you can rely on. That's the incentive. If I don't do those things consistently, like my life, not to sound dramatic, but like my life becomes a lot more complicated and will start to get less stable. Um, and if you can find an avenue into like loving life and finding value in your life, then that stuff, as you say, an incentive matters. I think
Mm.
you do need to have a motivation and a sense of self-love, self-worth, which those terms are talked about more and more, but I think that as a society we're still struggling to figure out like what that really means on an individual level, like self-love. I
Mm.
know so many people, most people really struggle with that. And I don't know. It's tough because I think the road to self-love is actually sort of difficult and requires a certain amount of determination. But it's doable, I think, as well.
It is, yeah. And one way of looking at it is, do you ever notice we would never talk to other people the way we talk to ourselves?
100%.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things I would say to someone, if someone's coming to me for therapy, is you try to talk to yourself or treat yourself as if you are someone you care about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you find that difficult, then treat yourself as if you're someone that you're responsible for.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, you can be responsible for someone. You don't necessarily have to like them. You know what I mean? So if you can't treat yourself as if you're someone you care about, you treat yourself as if you're someone you're responsible for.
Mhm.
And what you're sometimes looking at, you mentioned earlier on about the instant gratification, and I think that's human nature. Maybe I don't think that's a recent thing. I think this is hardwired.
Yeah, it makes sense neurologically. It makes
We're
sense.
we're looking for instant gratification a lot of time. We're looking for the quick route out. We're looking for the quick fix, the easy fix. What takes this off my mind, or how do I best avoid this? I think when you look at the difference between the best way out of something and maybe the best way through it,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
even round it if you have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
I think they're very different questions. So it's just looking at the same thing, but just sometimes changing our perspective slightly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think the older I get, the more I believe in like the idea of mindset shifts. Like changing the way we think about certain things can be quite a powerful thing, actually.
Oh, yeah, without that, we have what would you call it? Rigid thinking, I guess.
Yeah,
And we need to be open to new information and new ideas,
definitely.
and give ourselves permission to fail.
Yeah, it's a big part of life. Like I know it's sort of a cliche, but I do think that's when we learn is when we fail. It's a really important part of being human.
I can't remember who it was said it, but there was somebody I read once who said we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
Mm.
100%. Yeah. Which makes sense like on a like evolutionary through an evolutionary lens as well. That makes sense, doesn't it? That.
So, Kaz, anybody who would be interested in going into the media, looking at movie making, filmmaking, and so on, Again, I'm imagining it's going to be like the music industry, things like that. It's not necessarily going to be easy. So I'm just
No.
wondering what kind of advice you would have for someone.
Yeah, as you say, I think I think that it's important to remember. It's important to make sure that this is really what you want to do, because it can be very hard work, can be very hard on the nerves and the soul as well. But if it is what you're supposed to do, I think the one of the most important things is artists are very their self-worth is very much tied to their art, and how people view their art really can sometimes dictate how you feel about yourself. And I think it's
Mm.
really important to I mean, constructive feedback and evolving and trying to get better as part of the gig, but not taking validation or put downs too much to heart, I think is really important. Otherwise your ego is just going to be going up and down like a pogo stick, like, which isn't good for anyone. And and this is going to sound like a cliche, but I also think that if this is what you're meant to do, keep going. You know, have fun with it. Don't take it too seriously. We're not going into combat. We're not doing brain surgery. Like, we're making movies. Just enjoy yourself. And yeah, if you're willing to work hard and keep going, then then I think that like nothing but good things await you, really. And so yeah, as long as this is what you have to do, keep going.
That's excellent advice. What have you got up and coming in projects?
So I have 4 feature-length scripts, one of which, you mentioned the beginning, The Stray, which I'm trying to sell. And I'm also trying to get my other 3 scripts sort of, ready for the marketplace as quickly as possible. And yeah, I'd like to sell a script before, I turn 36, so in the next 3 years, hopefully, and then maybe in 5 years, I'll be making another a feature-length film. But yeah, happily sort of ensconced in my writing and my freelance video editing work at the moment. So yeah, I'm just focusing on that for the future and for 2025.
And where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Caz McGovern Score. And also on my website, www.cmvideoarts.com. And They Don't Leave is available on YouTube and will be available on Prime as well in December.
And I will put a link to it in the description of this
Thank
video. I
you.
would encourage anybody, if you haven't seen it, do watch it. It is a good movie. It's quite thought-provoking. It is quite a
Thank
good
you.
movie. Kaz, it's been an absolute privilege to chatting with you today.
Well, the feeling is mutual. Thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful discussion, and I love your channel so much. So being on it, it's been really neat. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming along. And as I always say, and I always do mean this, maybe we could do this again sometime.
Yes, anytime.
And don't forget to watch her movie, They Don't Leave. The link is in the description.